Welcome to the Love Pod, where inspiration, vision, and real connection come alive. Wherever you are, you belong here.
Welcome to the Love Pod, everyone. I am your host, Nathaniel. I'm so pleased to have our wonderful special guest today, Michael Rizk, who is the community builder extraordinaire, winner of the school games, master of daily flow, and leading so many people into expanding their capacity through movement, reconnecting to our bodies, and just an inspiring, wonderful guy who talks a lot about our infinite goodness. Michael, I'd love to just ask you to invite you to share with us more about who you are, why you do what you do. And yeah, love having you on the show, man.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been great getting to know you. We're definitely kindred spirits. And so this podcast makes a lot of sense, and I'm excited to have the conversation. So I actually grew up in New Jersey. I'm the oldest of five. Some reason my parents knew to have me first so I could lead by example. Life was very chaotic and disordered growing up. And, I felt in many ways unprepared for what life was going to be. And, it kind of reminds me of, Richard Rohr, Franciscan priest, would say, when you didn't grow up in that orderly environment, like the journey of suffering starts a little sooner, but it prepares you, and then, when you actually face your life, like, you're often advanced in some ways and you're ready for kind of the chaos that is inherent in life. So my journey moved into personal training in 1999. From there, I became a massage therapist. And then I learned eventually how to combine those skills through a mentorship program called GIFT. It takes place in Adrian, Michigan. I was hosted by doctors Gary Gray and David Tiberio. They're physical therapists who more or less said, like, hey, we're doctors of PT, and the model has some shortcomings. And we're going to show you another way of interpreting movement. And rather than telling you what to do with people, we'll teach you how to think about what to do. And so it was all about empowering us with a thought process. I went through that in 2009. In 2010, I came back as a facilitator to help with the new students coming through, which was a massive honor. I've done quite a bit of teaching for them since. And I then built out a corrective movement therapy practice. I work with pro athletes or athletes all the way up to the pro level, which again was a real honor. And interestingly, pro athletes are, I heard it stated once, which is really helpful to think about, they're expert compensators. They have limitations just like everybody else in their body, but for whatever reason, they just have the ability, that resilience to compensate. And, obviously it catches up with most athletes at some point in their career. So then from there, when my movement practice was really at its best, I felt this gaping void that I was very much working on the surface of people's lives. And I was kind of this superficial experience for people, and I didn't like that. I feel like you might relate to that. And I wanted to be part of a bigger conversation. And so I started kind of unintentionally moving into like a coaching practice. And I, over the course of 10 years, built out an identity-based coaching system. And fundamentally, I think one of the highlights of it, well, the highlight of it is that helping people recognize that they're just an experience and expression of infinite goodness. That's all we are. It's something you can only wake up to, receive as a gift, and act out. That's the meat and potatoes of the course, but ultimately it helped people engage in a way to help them. Okay, let me say this. When people hire a coach, it's for two reasons. It's either because you're doing something that you don't want to do, or you're not doing something that you do want to do. And then ultimately you don't know why. And it's the not knowing why that creates the suffering. And then the way you help people resolve that is not by taking new action, but by expanding awareness and understanding. So it's an awareness and understanding based engagement that helps people change behavior without trying to change, fix, or improve themselves as a person. And so it's all about just expanding the lens, helping them see things clearly. That new information changes how they interpret reality, and then their reality shifts from there. I know that was a mouthful. I hope that was somewhat clear. And then from there, I have now come back full circle. I'm operating as a restorative movement coach. I have a company called Expanding Capacity. Works very similar to my coaching practice. With the coaching side of things, I'm not trying to fix people. I'm trying to create awareness and understanding, and that information then changes, fixes, and improves things naturally. Same thing with the body. I don't try to fix parts of the body. I just try to make the whole body work better. So we go into literally every joint in the body. I might as well just get them out of the way. We go into the rear foot, the forefoot, the knee, the hip, the front hip, the back hip. We go through the low back, the mid back, the neck, the front shoulder, the back shoulder, the elbows, the wrists, the fingers, and the thumbs. So we literally just get everything to move way better. And it's a more enjoyable approach because whenever you're involved in like a fix it type program, there tends to be a heaviness with it. It can feel obligatory. And this is just way different. It's like, hey, we've got this body that does all these wonderful things. Let's read the owner's manual and let's maximize what we're capable of doing.
I think it's so fantastic, everything you've said, Michael. And, I thought at one point you're going to break into the ankle bone's connected to the knee bone.
In my head, I definitely was.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate, hearing more about the journey and how you've also expanded your capacity in terms of your professionalism, but also your yearning to connect more deeply. And I think community building is one of the highest expressions of co-creation that we're seeing emerge. And it really brings to light a lot of I think a wound that's been in community or in for humankind for a while, like this disconnect from one another, and also, the wounds of like trust and not feeling necessarily connected even to our bodies and ourselves. And when you talked about professional athletes being expert compensators, I feel like that is such a lens into so many professionalisms, right? I mean, high achievers wear the badge of stress as something that is to be sought after, like, and yet, we know it's hiding something underneath, that's fear. And I think your summary of coaching is so apt, and in this time where there's so many life coaches out there, and that didn't exist, I think Tony Robbins claims to have invented this field that didn't exist. And yet, so obviously there, on for many of us who are seeking that deeper connection, that deeper awareness of who we are, expanding our capacity of that, there is a yearning. It's clearly there's a market for this connection to the inner self and bringing out this larger calling that we all have, and I believe we all have a unique expression of. What has been the most enriching part of your journey in terms of this new expression of yours and adventure into, building community, and share more about that?
Yeah, honestly, I found it very difficult. It's been a real struggle and I still find it challenging to create community, just because, I'm a victim of abuse and neglect. I'm not claiming that my suffering's any more than anybody else's, but I've had my fair share of suffering. And, I spent a lot of time feeling excluded and lonely and isolated. And so that created probably the real craving to like be in community with other people. But I don't think that I still consider myself to be like a good community host. I think it's a life skill I'm still trying to kind of lean into and develop, and then not take too seriously. Because at the end of the day, it's like I'm just trying to be helpful to people. And when I do get a chance to talk to people in close quarters like this, like I love it. I really love to be in communion. But many times I feel introverted, even though people see me as an extrovert, and that kind of creates some tension at times. And that can be a little frustrating, to be honest, because the way I'm seen doesn't match necessarily how I'm experiencing reality. Um, Not that I necessarily feel like I'm compelled to like have to fit it, like move into a box and act in a way in accordance with what people see, but it is frustrating to feel that tension there between the two. And there is a part of me that just wants to burst onto the scene and express myself fully and freely. It's baby steps, man, drip by drip. It's like you just gotta. There's no shortcuts around the gap here. You gotta go through. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I figured at least a little bit of honesty up front might go a long ways.
Yeah, well, I first of all, I really appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable, and I feel like this is how we do actually connect more authentically with one another, when we're visible in our vulnerability and share and communicate more of who we are and how we experience life. Like we,
Yeah.
you know, and there is physiological differences between extroverts and introverts, and for a long time, I didn't really know what I was, because even to this day, I consider myself more of an ambivert, and I feel like too, leadership inherently has this element, that friction you talk about, of people perceiving you a certain way, and yet the inner game does not always match that. And I love the perception, and I've been in a lot of circles with elders and things, and I've kind of had some behind the scenes conversations with leaders and people in places where they have to put on a certain front because they have a responsibility to either provide, direction to a community or voices of wisdom. And there is a loneliness that can happen that because people don't always perceive. I think it happens to a lot of celebrities too when they become too significant and lose that connection piece. And so I hear you, and I feel like one of the beautiful things about school is like there is a network also of community co-creators like you and I both, and we can have some of these conversations. And I think having them in real time where people can listen to them is also helpful because I know there's a lot of people feeling like they're building in isolation, they're feeling lonely, they're feeling frustrated, and I do believe there's another way. And I think the challenge of it is that we are responsible to co-create it, and we can have those egos that bump up to one another, and it requires deeper conversations. Like these are not flyby conversations where you can just have an established comprehension of meaning between one another. I mean, I might say when you use the word like expanding capacity, well, that could mean something totally different to me, or flow. Could mean something totally different. And so it requires us to have like, you know, coffee, a chat, maybe a beer, or, go for a walk, or even go for a cruise. Julia has been looking at like meeting up with families who are doing what they're calling world schooling and going with their families and traveling the world, doing things together. And this is the depth of relationship and intimacy that I feel like our species has been, at least in the West, in a big way, has been neglecting. And so it's led to a lot of us who have experienced, abuse and neglect and all these things. And now I feel like there's this whole generation of people who want to stop that cycle from happening in this generation and create a much more kind and embracing environment for the next generation so that they don't have to maybe lose connection with their sensitivities and shut down. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. And what's kind of cool is, there's this principle. So when I went through my movement mentorship in 2009, they taught this really cool thing called the PST thought process. And again, the premise was like, we can't tell you what to do when you're sitting with somebody because everybody's individual. And if I try to give you a templated response in a way to treat all people, we're inherently disrespecting the most important principle of individuality. And so the thought process was principles, strategies, techniques. And ultimately, you have these principles. These are the undying truths that govern not just movement, but all facets of reality, right? So like, for instance, one principle is that our body follows the path of least resistance. So does our mind, we move, we're an interconnected mind, body, and spirit. There's like these three facets of who we are. Well, we move in the forward to back, side to side, and rotational plane. So there's a three-dimensionality there. And so there's just lots of carryover. And so they'd say, hey, you have these principles. These are the truths that you anchor to help people. From the principles, you develop a strategy. And where I would get lost in the beginning, I think where everybody does inherently, is you create a strategy, but it's no longer rooted in the principle, and then it falls apart. But you need to go through that. You need to fail in order to figure out like, oh man, okay, yes, I had a good intention. It started well, but as soon as I started to apply myself, I lost translation of the principle, the truth. And then once you have the strategy in place, then the technique, you choose the technique based on, what you're qualified to do in order to help people. And so going through that thought process was honestly crippling. It was very difficult because it required tremendous unlearning. And they pointed out somewhat unintentionally, and I think innocently, like we think that we think about things, but often we're just recalling, and it's not, I might have, somebody comes into me with back pain, like I'm already thinking, all right, I know these 5 exercises. That's not thinking. And so when that veil is pulled back and you start to see that, it's like, oh my gosh. And it was very difficult to go through. However, it's the thing that led me to create a rather unique coaching experience where people could change without having to try to. And it's because of that thought process. And so yeah, the mentorship was called Gift, and it's truly just been the gift that keeps on giving.
That's really amazing. It reminds me of the Peaceful Warrior and the encounter with Socrates, who talks about like this concept that a lot of people aren't thinking, and people are not having their own original thought. And, I feel like what you're talking about is deeper than what I view as coaching, in the sense that it's really about returning people back to their essential nature and finding who they are. And I mean, whereas a coach may be able to do that, I think that, that's more of the work of deep inquiry, mysticism, and connection. So I feel like one thing I love about you, Michael, is you are focused on the body and expanding movement capacity, and that's so important. I mean, I see my background in holistic health. I've explored a lot of different perspectives in this, and I've always been interested in the interconnection of everything. You and I have had some back and forth about like fascia, and like I'm very interested in like all the systems of the body. And to me, working with you, what I love about your work is you've introduced other planes of movement that I never really considered. And you talk about stability really being the precursor to mobility, and a big part of your daily flow, which people have access to in your community, is so helpful because you can go and kind of start to realize, oh, even today I was walking, I'm like, I have stiffness in my ankle. And I was thinking about what you were saying, like that stiffness is a lack of mobility, which is probably causing some other thing in my back being sore. And I got to go and build my capacity back up in that movement. And I feel like that's so important. And then you've also combined it with this rich reservoir, which I feel shows up in your beingness when you're teaching these things. And probably is what people get, is like, oh, Michael's so extroverted. But I think it's coming from a deep place, well, that you've cultivated from your coaching, where you inherently know the innate goodness that's in everyone, and that infinite depth that, because you've done a lot of that deeper inquiry. And I also, I mean, if I may be so bold, I've noticed like you are also this master iterator. Like you're constantly iterating, working on the flow, making it better, better, better. And I think that's a real important skill as an entrepreneur. But I've also noticed like that frustration you talk about come up because, and I've shared this, is like sometimes we want to go deeper with people than they're willing, or maybe have the capacity at their current level to go. It's like the meditation aspects that you were incorporating. I think that maybe was too much for some folks. And so it's like we're always finding our way and meeting people where we're at. So all that to say is I just want to thank you. I think you're doing a great job, and I think there's a reason why you won the school games. I saw your hearts and you showing up every day, and you practicing iteration, and so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And yeah, and I mean, obviously we want to hear about that, but I don't want to push the conversation in that direction. I just want to invite you to yeah, like reflect on your journey and see your goodness, because like that what you said about feeling isolation and being difficult. We don't always make the time to acknowledge our leaders. I feel like sometimes we just put them on pedestals and like, oh, they're so great. But I just want to acknowledge you for showing up and doing all that work, because you really did lead with your hearts, and I think you inspired a lot of people.
Yeah, I've been I would say that that's been the bigger reward than the school games trophy. Is just hearing people. I've gotten several messages from people who have said, like, I really respect the way you went about this. And essentially, the way I won the school games was I hosted a workshop called Reversing the Effects of Sitting, Scrolling, and Screen Time. And I ended up doing that in 11 communities. Might have been 12, but I think it was 11. I was just delivering value, trying to be helpful to people, and then giving them an offer so good they couldn't say no to it. And it worked. And then, something really interesting happened in the last week. It might be partially because I think culturally, like there's a lot of urgency, and it might just feel natural to wait till that last minute to really help out. But the way I experienced it was once I had decided that I was going to win, and I really had that approach, that mentality, people, like, you just start to get the unexpected surprises. People that had no idea who they were. I started getting referrals from different places, and people just showed up in a really big way. And so it was neat because it kind of revealed, the generosity that I try to put forth every day. It felt like it came back in many ways. It was a beautiful thing.
That's wonderful. Well, I mean, top of my mind is, can you share a little bit about your experience going to the school games? I think for a lot of people, it's an experience that is, on the pedestal, and there's probably mixed feelings about it. I know I've contemplated a lot. Like it's kind of like there's an edge to school because there's this, you know, there is a fine line between business and community, and monetizing community. As much as there is a lot of value that's added, like, it can create, barriers for people, barriers of entry, classism, and all these things that are subtleties. And yet I know the hearts, at least what I hear, and I saw it reflected in your posts, is like the hearts of the co-creators who are building school and are a part of, the vision here, really do have a vision of what's, a higher vision for humanity. And I'd love to hear more about your higher vision and your experience within all that.
Yeah, and I'll tie it back to the wounds, the abuse and neglect. There was this principle in applied functional science of loading to exploding. And so, if I ask somebody, if you want to jump, what's the first thing you do? You squat, right? So you want to go up, but you go down first in order to go up. And so I now realize in hindsight, kind of the gift of abuse and neglect. Like nobody ever wants to experience that, but there just is a silver lining, around all experiences. And I think the abuse has made me a very like kind, compassionate, empathetic person. And then I think the neglect has made me somebody who just truly values connection. And so I feel like that's very much tied into the humanity piece and just wanting to be, there's a great quote by Richard Rohr. I studied him intensely for quite a few years. I did a retreat with him in New Mexico, and a real game changer, helped me expand my understanding of religion and spirituality and just a different way of, I think, of seeing it in a way that's led me to the idea that all we are is an experience of goodness, and wanting to create a model and a framework that was inclusive. It doesn't say because you believe this, you're excluded, but it's something where there's a seat at the table for everybody. So I was really blessed by his work. But he said, if you do not transform your pain, you will most assuredly transmit it. Right. And so when we're in a difficult spot, the tendency is to, we move into this protective state because we're fearful or uncertain. And then we start transmitting our pain. Whatever your protective behavior is, you're transmitting it through that behavior. That can be getting angry with other people. That can be drinking your third cup of coffee. That can be wanting to sex to tame anxiety. That can be any number of, I've heard many, many things, and I've experienced all of them. And, I've learned now when you appreciate it in that context, like, oh man, if I act out this protective pattern, I'm just transmitting the pain. I'm not transforming it. So it doesn't go away. And that's given me the idea to learn. So I frame it now as a life skill. When I am in this midst of emotional pain, I'm just thinking about what part of me do I need to expand my capacity to be able to tolerate what I'm experiencing right now. And so I framed it as like almost like an opportunity. Not necessarily, it's not pleasant, right? But it does feel meaningful. And it's reframed, it's changed the experience of suffering, because I suffered every day, just like everybody else. And so now I'm just very much focused on expanding my capacity in those ways that allows me to navigate emotional pain while continuing to move forward. Maybe I slow down a little bit at that time because my resources are distributed, but it's given me a way to stay connected. And, I just, from the humanity standpoint, Richard Rohr also said, transformed people transform people, and so it's like when people, will say nice things, it's like, I certainly appreciate it, but the reality is the thing that's helping them most is the part of me that's been transformed, right? And that part of me that's infinitely good and goodness, I actually have, I'm sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but the goodness, I found out when I started sharing that message, one of the first things people would do is to start trying to figure out who they can exclude from the definition of goodness, right? And then you see, there's the false self emerging. And so you can't really be intellectual about it, right? You need to create a framework or a rule or a way of engaging with this idea so that it doesn't spiral. And so I came up with this framework that goodness has three qualities. It's unconditional, it's unlimited, and it's unearned. And so everybody fits into that framework. And that's what makes it beautiful. And so, because one of the things that people will base someone's goodness on is how they behave. But the way I see behavior is a way to tell a story about how you've experienced your life. right? And I think of behavior, I mean, given like 95% of our behavior is subconscious, behavior is not something we do as much as it's something that's done through us. It's all patterned response. Not to say that we have zero agency and not to remove accountability in any way, but most of our behavior is just a patterned response. And once you recognize that, you can separate yourself from the behavior, which I think is necessary to rediscover your true self or to reconnect to who and what is inherently good about you. Because if you define yourself by behavior, then you've made your goodness conditional. And so you make it unconditional by divorcing yourself from, you see the output, but then you recognize, oh man, that's not me doing it. That's me protecting myself based on something previous that's happened to me. But then that creates an opportunity of like, what do I need to deal with? What do I need to sit with? What maybe have I processed already? I feel like I've done the work, but it's not necessarily done with me, right? And obviously we're not in control of that. We can only like do the dance. And so I know this is kind of like I bounced around a little bit. Hopefully I got to that humanity piece a little bit.
I actually think it's really beautiful the way you express yourself, Michael. And it could, again, it goes back to like this depth that you've obviously gone through in your journey, contemplating and interconnecting, all these thoughts that form part of a whole, and not really even just thoughts, but really lived experience. And I really think this is an important reflection for me and for all of our listeners, remembering that behavior is coming from that place of conditioned response and is and I think that every master develops their own framework, and when we are truly the embodiment of that unconditional, infinite goodness, and there is no resistance in our physiology or in any of our consciousness at all to express it, I think it does express in a unique way, and you're finding that way in a way that I feel is really beautiful because it connects us to something that is really apropos in this time. Like there's a lot of awareness that it's through the body. It's not about escaping the body. It's not about avoiding the pain. It's about going into those pains. And as you were talking about that loading to explode, recently I've been thinking a lot about like, where did I really learn my skill sets and my ability to listen deeply and to meditate? And it was actually like a lot of pain when I was young. And, I had severe migraines. Like I see some people talk about, I have a migraine, and they're like this. And when I had a migraine, I'd be like, I couldn't look at light, and I'd be like the intensity of that pain and pressure was so intense. I'd have to lie down on the floor and go into stillness and go into the pain. I hated taking pills. And then I usually have to just, let go of my lunch to feel good, better for the pressure. And the next day I would feel like refreshed, like rebooted. But I learned like how to deep listen. And then obviously, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of bullying. I've dealt with emotionally dysfunctional families, and I was guided to study indigenous wellness addictions prevention because I noticed not only like substance addiction, you mentioned a few, but also just the addictions of like avoidance of life that plagues our society, whether it's shopping or sex or screens and all these things that or take us away from really just being in the body. And so I love that you have taken all these skill sets and really share it in a very accessible way. It's like move this way, listen to your body. And what's interesting about your practice is it really, for me, I've always had a pretty good proprioception and awareness of my body. I think it's from some of the meditation techniques that I've been practicing for like 20 years, but also I've just always been like pretty tuned in because I don't take a lot of, pills or anything like that at all. And I feel like that's a really good doorway for a lot of people to start, is just start connecting back to moving well. And like when you're more in flow, when you're moving better, you're probably gonna, you know, expand your capacity for experiences of life. You're gonna like, I'm gonna go for a longer walk, or I'm gonna walk up that hill and when I didn't think I could, and then I'll see the view. And then it adds to richness, and abundant life can, for a lot of us on the journey, because I think we're all spiritual beings having a spiritual experience. I don't think some of us are spiritual and others aren't. I just think it just takes different forms. For someone, it's a plumber, and for another person, it's a yogi, and that's cool. Like
Yeah.
I think we have, like you say, infinite goodness means eternal goodness too, to me, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
anyways, I
It
appreciate
is eternal.
it's eternal. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I see the manifestation of goodness with, the Big Bang was goodness revealing itself. So like people will say, well, what's the basis? It's like, well, it's like literally the oldest story in the book. And so, and then you can get into like, this things can be a slippery slope. Like you have to assign a value to creation. Now, obviously, we can choose to assign any value that we want, but if we look at humanity and the way that we act as if we value being created and creation in general. That's not to say that there aren't outliers and things like that. But if you like I would look at one of the original ideas I had when somebody would kind of like refute the idea of goodness being inherent. It's like, well, what about like when your child was born? Like you treated that baby like royalty, right? Like you feed it the best food, you tiptoe around the crib, you put it in the best clothes, and it's like it's you're praising, right? You're acting out this goodness, and it did nothing to deserve it, right? It didn't. It's not performing at that point. There's no accolades. It's just goodness inherent in creation, and it's a really beautiful thing. And then you see that all the way up to like healthcare workers and firemen and policemen and people who are there to serve people. It's like what we're telling a story through that behavior, and so the goodness is everywhere as far as I'm concerned, right? And then when people come and they want to hire and work with me in a coaching aspect, it's like just recognize it's the goodness in you that wants good things for you. And so, the part of you that is seeking this out is your goodness. So it's like it's already there, and it's just waking you up to it. And then as you see it, that single revelation, and of course was the result of many revelations and also failures. It has transformed how I interact with people because once your goodness comes from within, you don't need to manipulate people to get some need met.
Yeah.
And people would, that they'd be doing things that they don't want to do or not doing things that they do want to do. And I would just try to help them understand why. I was like, listen, here's the bottom line. We all have needs, right? And even the perfect parent is not capable of meeting all of your needs, right? We have spiritual needs to be connected to something higher than ourselves. Maybe a parent can model that. That'd be wonderful, right? But they can't fundamentally satiate that need. And so there's going to be a gaping void, and you will try to use things in your life to fill that gap. But once you then reconnect to this message of original goodness, and you just receive that as a gift because that's all it is, and goodness can only be recognized in my experience, recognized by way of contemplation. You can't become good; you already are good. You can only think about the idea that you already are good and then be present to the idea of that goodness. That's the first part of my day every day. It's just that's receiving the gift. So in the morning, I receive the goodness, and then the rest of the day is about expressing it. Let's express the goodness that we already are. And so I had a client, we were actually in the office here, and he said, well, he's like, a lot of my worth comes from how much I get done on my to-do list. I was like, well, let's just flip it. How about instead of having to finish your to-do list to become worthy, how about you finish your to-do list as an expression of your worth, right? So not becoming, expressing the goodness. And it's obviously it's a shift. You have to reframe it and look at it a bit differently. But it's really exciting way to look at the world and be in the world. And the other thing that I think that I found that was really significant is when I rediscovered goodness, that helped me to become more present in my life than anything else I've ever done. Because if we inherently will attach to and define ourselves by our most painful experiences. It's part of what it means to survive. But when that becomes your reference point, then you just keep recreating that wheel because that's the energetic state that you're inside of. And then when you are in that state and you're in this kind of place of like hypervigilance or constant threat detection, you don't want to be present. You don't want to be present to that experience. And so that's why we become absent, as far as I'm concerned, and what I've noticed in my own experience. But once I reconnected to goodness, it's made me I desire presence because there's something good to be present to. And so it's just, to me, I always say it might be a bit of an overstatement, but it fundamentally solves all problems.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
Yeah. You and I are talking about the same thing. I have huge respect and resonance with what you're saying. And it's interesting too, things that are painful or uncomfortable, there are gifts in my experience hidden in all of them. It's the resistance that creates, I think, the suffering. And Buddha talked about this. The mind has a subtle way of rejecting or attaching to, creating aversion or craving. And it's interesting when what Julie and I went on our quest out west looking for conscious community, this inspired acronym that's now taken on dual meaning, is for gifts. It's get it from the source and give it from the source. And you
Oh,
said it
I
in
love
just
that.
a
I love
unique way,
that.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and and I think to me, it's the same topic. I say like true spiritual enlightenment is the words that I would use for it, which is to me. Um, a mastery of the self, a mastery of creativity, a mastery of elemental goodness, or however you want to talk about it. Um, it isn't an achievement. I agree with this. It is a perception shift. It's a paradigm shift. It's an expansive remembrance of who we already innately are. We cannot become it. And this is why I think love actually has no opposite. I think it just has resistance. And some of us who maybe operate in, what we could classify as different levels of psychosis and whatever, I think they're just more pinched off. They have more armor, they have more trauma that's unresolved, and they've learned to adapt out of survival because that's what the ego drive does to take care of themselves, and the self
yeah,
becomes the most important thing, and so everyone else becomes a tool for self-servitude. And I think this is the most extreme forms of religion that we see. We see one being put on a pedestal above all others, and then we see one as, no, I am supremely the only important one. And we see these polarities in the spiritual, conversation, and it brings up the conversation of evil. And the deep philosophical question of the problem of evil. Okay, well, if love is real and all this stuff, then why is there poverty and suffering and all these things? Well, to me, I think it is that journey that humankind and life has embarked upon to go through the challenges of the self that is part of this ecosystem that can endure pain and suffering, to eventually recognize that goodness that you talk about and transcend its limited expression of it, realize that same self is present in all of life, all around it, and wanting the best for all of life. Then we step into another level of expanded capacity and mastery.
yeah, yeah,
And that to me is world enlightenment. And just to echo what you're saying, I do believe it is like true embodied spiritual remembrance of who we are, our innate, infinite, eternal goodness is the solution to everything, because it moves from us from even just brotherly love, where we recognize, to this ultimate loving, unconditional love that. And when I say unconditional love, like I've contemplated unconditional love for a long time. I mean, the Christ Letters talks about like the only difference between us and the transcended masters of highest consciousness is they're undeviatingly and consistently in a state of unconditional love. Well, what
mm,
does that mean if we really contemplate it, right? Is it that they just forgive everyone? Because that's kind of how we've been taught about unconditional love. It's like, well, we just forgive everyone. Well,
yeah,
what
yeah,
does forgiveness mean? Like the words give is in that forgiveness. But what is love itself? And I think you touched on it, and an elder said this to me once. We honor Creator when we're creative.
mm,
And when we consider love as a creative power that's present in all the beauty that we see all around us, that the mind can barely comprehend in nature, all of a sudden, unconditional love becomes very much exactly what you're saying in just a different perspective. It's infinite goodness. It's like it's just life, like in all the ways that it expresses.
yeah,
So I love the way you share, man. And I feel like these conversations where we like everyone talks about iron sharpening iron. I don't really like that. I like, light ignites light, or
yeah, yeah,
like we, because I feel like we're igniting something that exists within all of us. It's not like we're
yeah,
special and we're more enlightened. We might be further along the path because we've spent more time in contemplating. Maybe we've had more pain and suffering, so it's caused us to ponder. But there's a rich conversation that's happening in the tapestry of humankind, which is spurring our recognition of one another as the miracles of life that we really are.
yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about no opposite of love, because the way I see it is like I could use maybe goodness and love as interchangeable. So it's like there's love and then there's separateness from love. right? You may be separated from the experience of love or goodness, and then you are capable of evil.
Mm.
And so I heard this, Richard Rohr again. He somebody had asked him a question, something like, what is sin? I don't remember if it was what is sin or if there was some other context, but it was around sin. And he's like, oh, the big one, and he said, he said, what we often think of as sin is not sin, it's the symptom of sin.
Mm.
So the way he described it is, if you want to put in the context of God or goodness or love, or it doesn't matter, but like when you're connected to that, right, you're not capable of sin. You must first disconnect from that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you are in the thing, the greed, the lust, the envy, those things are capable once we're disconnected from that goodness. And then, I think it's probably like our initial traumatizing experience when we are separated from goodness. That could be a parent shaming or criticizing you. That could be getting bullied on the playground. You start to have a sense of separateness. Things have happened to your body. You don't want to be in your body, right? Which is why meditation is so important, to learn how to be in the vessel again.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't know how to be in the body, you can't act out the goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I just see the separateness as like one of the roots of suffering. And of the three, the unconditional, unlimited, unearned, the one that people struggle with most is the unearned.
Mm-hmm.
People, I think, especially in a Western culture, there's that like meritocracy, right? Like you've got to earn the goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's kind of off the table. And it's just, I think
Mm.
it comes back to, I think the key skill that you need to develop in order to receive goodness is humility.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so I have this little phrase that humble receivers of abundance are powerful expressors of abundance.
Mm.
If I see somebody who's not expressing abundance in the way that they want, doing the things they want to do and not doing the things they don't want to do, it's because they actually haven't received.
Mm.
So it's kind of like the jump, right? You want to jump, but you got to squat first. It's
Mm.
like you want to express, but you got to learn how to receive. And then it's trying to get people into that, to shift from that mode of doing, which is good, but first come into the being,
Mm.
right? Into the body. Let's be with, yeah. So, and then things I think kind of just start to unfold from there. But listen, it's a process, man. I don't think it's a process that's for the faint of heart,
No.
and there's no quick fixes. There's no, it's just, I always tell people right up front, practice and process. Practice, you've got to be involved.
Mm.
Process, even if you do it perfectly, it's going to take time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you talk about the earning thing. I really resonate with this. And I was just yesterday we were talking on the show about this, to me, it's that the heaven is a worthy contemplation. And what is it? Is it a place we go to where everyone's living in the clouds? Is it, is everyone at the same level of consciousness, that we knew them when we go there? Because I always had this joke like, is it everyone waiting in line to talk to Jesus to get what they want? Because everyone's like, it's little Freddie's up there. He's like, I want a Lamborghini. He's like, Freddie, I gave you a Ferrari yesterday. I crashed it. Like, what is heaven, right? And I believe that Christ talked about it as being near and now. And that's near and earn are the same words, but when you put the horse before the cart, earn becomes near, right? And own, our obsession with owning things and acquiring things becomes now. And if heaven is a state of infinite goodness, which I believe that's what it is, where we have no separation, because even when you think of separation, it's really a belief, right? Because how can we ever really be separate from our source? We can only have the perception of being separate. It's like
That's right.
we can never be separate from the land, but we
Yeah.
can certainly believe that we're separate from the land, and that's what allows us to do terrible things to other creatures and to cause environmental destruction that puts our own species at risk.
That reminds me of a concept from applied functional science, another principle of real and relative motion,
Okay.
right? So like if I can have a bone that's moving in space in a direction, but relatively speaking, what's happening at the joint is motion in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
So like an example of that would be if I looked over my left shoulder, right? There's real bone motion occurring through my neck.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can bring my chin to my left shoulder, and that's one way of creating cervical rotation to the left. Or I could bring my shoulders to the right, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that brings the shoulder closer to the chin rather than the chin. So you're creating these different motions top down,
Yeah.
bottom up. Um, yeah, because it's, that, and that I was likening that to your idea of separateness. Like, there's no real absolute separateness. It's just,
Mhm.
it's relative. It's based on your experience and how that shifts your perception.
Well, I love how you bring it back to the body. I was actually contemplating matter, physicality, and physics that was my first spur into my own awakening states. Contemplating the movement of things together, coming like paradox, like Zeno's paradox, understanding the nature of light and how it travels, and all these things maybe consider motion and bodies and how there are fundamental principles that are often like just bypassed. Even in mathematics, it's mathematics is a language, and we pretend to understand the complexity of it, but even the simplest basic principles of it, I don't think we have a full comprehension of as a species. Like equality, what does that symbol really mean? To me, it's about balance. It's about a fundamental equilibrium. So there's this balance point between all of us, and that movement, that perception of movement is really interesting, because like Zeno's paradox is like, as you get closer to an object in time, if you calculate the distance between half of those points and look at time, you never really quite touch everything. Which you can look at that one way as like, oh, well, we never touch anything. Or you can look at like, well, space is always what connects everything. So what is space then? And that equality sign has, something to do with it. And the more we know about the body, we realize like if we even just look at, like the fractal nature of length. And if we looked at all the spaces in between grooves, like we say this is a meter, but if we looked at all the texture of something, it's like a meter is way more than a meter. And we know how, like, if we stretch out a DNA, like goes to the moon and back how many times, and like, so really that infinite goodness is not just a nice to think about thing. It's actually inherent in the physical expression of life. And so I think the body connection is so important. We talk a lot about too how like Mother Earth is a symbiotic being, and like how we are interconnected with her, and this is part of our responsibility as stewards. Anyways, I'm also going in all these directions because you're reminding
Yeah.
me of some of my initial um, ideas that I had. Like I had a whole theory called the quantum infinitum theory of revolutions, where I saw every body as a quantum infinitum that has its own universe within it, and like that the center of the universe is within all of us, and we're all these
Yes.
centers walking around. And but
Yes.
this, you can get lost in the mental there, but really it comes
Sure.
back to that feeling and recognition of infinite goodness, that we are
Yes.
all on a journey. Either uh, we're returning home. As I heard this, who is it? I was reading Shakti Gawain's book, Living in the Light. She said her teacher said, "You can't do it the wrong way. You can just do it the long way."
Ah! That reminds me, George Santayana, probably a little harsher, but if those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
Hmm.
Or that actually wasn't the one that I was thinking. That is what he said, but I was thinking about John Wooden said,
Mm.
if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over?
Mm.
So
Mm.
those are your options. Do it right,
Mm.
do it over, right? What is right? Well,
Mm.
it's the one that helps you get to where you want to be in the most efficient a way.
Yeah,
Right? And
yeah.
then the
Mm.
long way would be, some gap in your perception of how you think things work and how they actually work.
Yeah.
Which is the reason why I'm always iterating so much too. It's because like I take a lot of time. One of the benefits of that mentorship that I went through is, when you develop a thought process, it almost like slows down the hands of time a bit,
Mm.
and it gives you space to like observe and then process and then do
Mm.
something. That was a crippling part, I think, to have to wait, right?
Mm.
Because you want to just have that. I can recall a protocol really quickly and act it out immediately. But then that's like kind of confusing productive action with like, hasteful, wasteful energy, and they're not the same.
Mm.
But yeah, I lost
Mm.
my train of thought a little bit there, but that's essentially like, yeah, I'm trying to think of what else.
Iteration. You were talking about opening that
Yes,
that
thank
space.
you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, it's like I take a good amount of time, like, when I'll do like an initial evaluation on somebody, I'll take a whole session, an hour just to like watch. Because I want to go through all the major parts of the body
Mm,
to figure out where the big limitations are. Because there's
mhm,
like these active joints and then there's reactive joints. So
mm,
like an example would be your feet are actually reactive because they're like, if you're hitting the ground, like they're reacting to it. But the feet and ankles are really important. The hips are really important. The knees just stuck between.
mm,
So it's like if somebody had a football player come and crash into their knee and their ACL tore as a result of that, well, then you have an acute knee issue.
mhm,
But for the most part, most injuries are of a chronic nature, and it happens by way of your feet, something going on at your feet. Now your knee's paying the price, something going on with the hip. Now the knee's paying the price. And then, when I went through my mentorship, they're like, like the femur makes up the hip, but it also makes up the knee.
mhm,
And the tibia makes up the knee. It's the other half of the knee, but it's also the one bone that's in the ankle. And so it's like there truly is no separating, even the
mhm,
parts of the body, just like you and I cannot be separated. But that desire to want to try to do it right, not from a perfection standpoint, but from I'm going to die one day.
mhm,
Time is not unlimited. And I would like to make the best possible
mhm,
decision here. And then I think what I've learned is because I've allowed myself to start. Well, the big thing that happened with the iteration was once I connected to the goodness piece, and then I realized failing couldn't change my infinite nature.
mhm,
So then it was okay to fail then.
mhm,
I was
mhm,
willing to try new things, and now I can try new things and then quickly
mhm,
reiterate based on some new information that I didn't have at the time that I now have. But I think the goodness is probably the underlying, like the thought process was helpful in how I approach things, because I take a lot of time to really think through things. Einstein said, if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining it and 5 minutes solving it, right? And that's just not the cultural way, We're like very
mhm,
much a band-aid quick fix culture. We don't
mhm,
contemplate that. It's like, what am I, oh, I'm responding to symptoms here. It's like, well, good luck with that. It's
mhm,
just, if you're trying to resolve your symptoms, you're just actually getting trapped inside of them.
mhm,
And they unfortunately intensify over time. So, yeah, that thought process has been really helpful, but then also the goodness piece because it made me willing to fail, realizing that I truly lose nothing. And there's actually a great Tony Robbins quote. He said, "There are no results. There is no failure. There are only results."
mhm,
And it's like
mhm,
you can call it
mhm.
what you want, but it's just a
Yeah,
result.
yeah,
Might not be a desirable result,
yeah,
but that also doesn't make you a bad person.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think this is such a refreshing conversation to have, especially in such a fast pivoting time. It's funny on the topic of Tony Robbins. I was thinking about him the other day because I've heard Tony say, when everyone's running in one direction, you want to go in the other one. You probably have a chance. And it's funny because I see him like AI, 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 and everyone's running AI, AI. And I think one of the directions that I'm going, and I love the capability of AI, and it allows us to expand. But to put all my focus there, I feel is a mistake because the conversation of DI to me is very important. That divine intelligence, because
Mm,
that to me is what allows all of this to exist. And if we're not rooted in the beingness that honors and acknowledges that source of goodness, it's very easy to get into. To me, maybe AI is just a symptomology of the current expression of our cultural technological capability. And so, but where is the vision going? If we're looking to AI to give us the vision, hey, what should I do? And all this pivoting thing, and everyone's creating artifacts, and everyone's doing these things is like, and everyone's pivoting. I appreciate your approach because to me, that constant refinement leads to mastery. And it's like they say, don't read 1,000 books, read one book 1,000 times. And I feel like there's a lot of wisdom when we get to the granular nature, because every master had their own unique, um, radiant expression and experience of life itself. They were the embodiment of pure life. So you don't need to go and study from 1,000 masters. You can just find one master, and maybe that master is the seed within all of us, right? That's what Buddha means. I think the anointed one, that's what Christ means. It's just those polarities of here's the seed and this is where I'm headed and I'm just a blade of grass and let's go on a journey. And so that refining process that you do, Michael, I think it's really valuable because you're creating something that who knows what it will evolve into, especially with all your depth of skill sets and also the ecosystem of community, right? Because like you said, you have, even though maybe you feel like you're not doing that great of a job, which I would beg to differ, um, uh, but I won't beg. So you decide. Uh, I feel like you still have created a container of community, and even if it's just a handful of people that are the showing up as the consistent ones, and they're giving you the feedback, and you're seeing their transformation, there's inspiration in that, right? Because a master who works in isolation and tries to make the perfect thing and then, goes out to the world and the world has turned its back and is on another expression is one thing. But when you're actively iterating and working with people and taking the time to look at the fundamental structures of someone, like, man, like if you can help someone's ankle mobility that heals their knee and allows them to go on that fishing trip that they always wanted to with their grandson, like that's creating a memory and an expression of that infinite goodness that wouldn't have existed had you not shown up and done that work. So I implore you and I celebrate you, Michael, for being who you are.
Thank you. There was a really helpful model that I learned in the Mind Body Code written by Dr. Mario Martinez. He had these it's called portals of wellness. And it was a triangle and it had 5 layers. So it was safety, then love, then expression, then peace, then spirit.
Mm,
And basically everything you need to have like you need to have a sense of safety,
mhm,
right? Emotional, physical, because that's what brings you into a state of being. Then once you feel safe, then you're actually in a place to actually give and receive love.
mm,
And then once you're giving and receiving love, which is obviously a massive form of self, then you are actually at a place where you can fully and freely express yourself. And then once you are in a state of self-expression, then that creates peace of mind. And then once you have that peace of mind,
mm,
that leads to the transcendent spiritual experience,
mm.
like heaven on earth, or
Yeah.
recognizing you can influence your own life, improve the quality of other people's lives,
Mm,
things like that. And so what stuck out to me when I saw that model was the middle. And I realized it ties to the coaching insight I mentioned earlier. People hiring me because they're either doing things that they don't want to do or not doing things that they do want to
mm,
do. That is the level of expression. And so when you're struggling at the level of expression, it means there's something more fundamental that's not been satiated. And so that brings you into the portals of love and safety. And then as I started to realize that and flirt with those ideas, I ended up realizing
mm,
what creates an experience of safety greater than an experience of infinite goodness.
mm, mm,
Now it's not even emotional, it's divine safety,
mm,
right? It's
mm,
like an unspeakable, unknowable,
mhm.
just gift.
Yeah.
And so I've just added that little layer to it of the goodness piece that creates the safety, the love, the
Hmm.
expression,
Hmm.
and everything else just a chain reaction at that point.
Yeah. You know what I love so much about that, Michael, is because it reminds me a lot of my, from an indigenous ways of knowing perspective, and this includes cultures all over the world that have a unique vantage of this. One thing I've noticed pretty ubiquitously in almost all ceremony is it isn't humans that are typically at the center of ceremonial endeavor or a ceremonial practice in any way. It's always a symbol of our creator in some capacity, whether it's water or fire or air or an elemental or just love, or it's new life, like a naming ceremony, which there's it that refers more to the name that carries you on your journey. So it's about the journey. It's not so much about the human. And I think that it's that relationship of stewardship. So when we look at the foundation, that pyramid, I think there's a beautiful pyramid of transcendence, and it complements Maslow's hierarchy, I feel, in a lot of ways. And but having the foundation, realizing that the foundation already is infinite goodness, I feel like that's such an echo and that's such a reflection to me of that deeper way of seeing the interconnection of life, that there isn't really any inherent risk, and yet we have to be willing to trust that we are safe and to align ourselves with that infinite goodness, and that is what derives our safety. So when we express something that's vulnerable, saying, yeah, like I'm feeling depressed. And I mean, yeah, I remember having a conversation with you. Tell me about the pain, tell me about the suffering. And I've healed, but I haven't healed. It's my relationship with my creator that got me through clinical severe depression where I couldn't get out of bed from going through very challenging time in my life and dealing with bullying and dealing with divorce and things like this that were very challenging. And it was in that recognition that I am of of that source, that I am like where I came from. I am not imperfect. And Don Miguel Ruiz talks about this in his book, The Voice of Knowledge. Like it's our belief that we're imperfect that is causing a lot of this fury in the world. And he says, what if it's just that we are perfect? And that's the what's true. And I think it actually is. And which is so funny because when we talk about perfectionism, we talk about it as problematically, like people are perfectionists because they're trying to be perfect.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not, it's actually imperfectionism is what it is. They believe they're
Yeah.
imperfect. It's
Yes.
not perfectionism.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that reframe. Spot on. I do have, and you mentioned the word forgiveness earlier.
Yes.
I don't know what our time is on this, but
I'm good. If you have a few more minutes, I know we're over the hour. How are you for time?
yeah, I'm good.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
good till the top of the hour.
Sounds
So,
good to me.
in any event, so I created this model because I don't really believe in forgiveness. And
Mm.
now I can't say that, this is just my perspective. I'm just curious to hear what you think about it.
Yeah.
Right? So, let's just start by saying the only part of you that's capable of hurting me is your false self.
Mm.
And the only part of me that's capable of being hurt by you is my false self.
Mm.
Right? So now let's say you hurt me, right?
Mm.
And you hurt me in a way that you've already been hurt. And
Mm.
that I think that's where a lot of, well, I don't want to use the word yet, but if you shame, abandon, or betray me, those three archetypal
Mm-hmm.
wounds, it's because you've been shamed, abandoned, or betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of acting out this pattern. So let's say you act out this pattern and your false self hurts my false self, right? Now I feel like fundamentally it's only my false self that would need, because what Richard Rohr actually taught me is that, when somebody hurts you, you gain moral superiority over that person.
Mm-hmm.
It elevates you. It's like, oh, you hurt me. Now that puts me here. And now you need to apologize to me in
Mm-hmm.
order to level the playing field
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I don't believe in forgiveness. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be nice to hear, but I feel like the part of us that needs that will never be happy anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the thing that's liberated me is extending grace.
Mm-hmm.
So like again, like growing up in an abusive situation, I've tried to forgive, never worked. I've always, even though I said the words,
Mm-hmm.
um, I was just still carrying the heaviness. And then once I have this model I use called an experience wheel, where it's like four spokes on a wheel, and it just helps people to start to create context for their suffering. Because a lot of the pain that comes from suffering is not knowing why. And so actually maybe all of the suffering comes from that. But there's symptoms at 9 o'clock, there's behaviors at 6 o'clock, there's beliefs at 3 o'clock, and then there's experiences at 12. And so, let's just say somebody has the symptom of anxiety, right? And the behavior they're participating in when they're feeling most anxious is they're procrastinating. And then and by the way, traditional behavior change models just stop there. If you want to change a symptom, you have to change a behavior, and
Mm-hmm.
it will change it.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really change the relationship you have with yourself. To me, that's
Yeah.
where behavior change misses the mark.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
transformation.
Yeah.
It's not about changing the behavior. It's about becoming the new creation. But in any
Mm-hmm.
event, um, when I started building out this model, the question I would ask is, what does this behavior suggest you believe about yourself? Right? And so let's say implicit in the behavior of procrastination is the belief that nothing I do is good enough. And then, well, what experiences have you had in your life that cause you to believe nothing you do is good enough? I've had critical parents, and it's like now you've got this wheel,
Mm-hmm.
critical parenting
Mm-hmm.
created the belief that nothing I do is good enough. I act out that belief through behavior. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's such an important point. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily, we weren't taught to think this way.
Mm-hmm.
Behavior is a way for you to express your beliefs,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And so, if I want to know what somebody believes, I just watch how they behave because they're telling the story.
Mhm.
Um, so they act it out through procrastination, and procrastination now manifests as this anxiety. And so
Mhm.
it's often thought that the anxiety would be the problem here, but it's actually
Mhm.
not the problem, it's the manifestation of the
Mhm.
problem.
Mhm.
And so this model of the experience wheel, symptoms and behaviors are only what's happening,
Mhm.
but the beliefs and the experiences tell you why it's happening.
Mhm.
And it's that shift from the what to the why that moves somebody from self-critical, because
Mhm.
you're only going to criticize yourself if you're behaving in a way that you don't understand.
Mhm.
That's why you're critical. You don't have context for it. But
Mhm.
when you look at it through the big picture and say, oh my gosh, I've
Mhm.
been conditioned to be a procrastinator since I'm 6 years old.
Mhm.
The conditioning started then. And like now you're acting out this pattern that's been established many, many moons ago.
Mhm.
So when you get somebody to just simply shift from the what to the why, you help them shift from self-critical to self-compassionate because it's the awareness and the understanding. Then you see your anxiety and you're still going to be anxious, but you see it through a different lens. And then you need to see it first differently, and then it changes your understanding and appreciation of what this actually is, and then the behavior evolves and changes.
Mhm.
So when I saw my parents through the lens of their experiences, right? Because I got the tail end of it. Their behaviors, they behaved in a certain way in my presence, and that impacted me. But the way they behaved was only the what in the experience wheel. It didn't tell me the why. So as I got through the wheel and I started understanding my why, I was like, oh, my parents have a why too. And then I expanded it out and I came up with this little, like, it was called a behavioral family tree. And you're
Interesting.
basically just, yeah, you're doing an experience wheel for yourself, but then for your parents and then for their parents. And then you
Mhm.
start to have context. And then you start to see like, man, the things your grandparents were dealing with, um, it was just a freight train, man. And you're just
Mhm.
on that train still,
Mhm.
and it's like this has been going on for a long, long time. And then you realize there's obviously so many more generations of people that you'll never know, but you just start to, then for me, that empowered me to extend grace,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I felt like I've not had to forgive anyone since.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of curious to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, well, a lot, and I'll do my best to summarize and synergize this. So, a lot of what you said, um, well, first off, I'll say this. There's a famous line in a song that Gord Downie wrote from the Tragically Hip. It said, to me, I believe it's a beautiful contemplation for all of us. Is life just forgetting? And he always, like, he's a poet, right? There's deep meaning. It's life just forgetting. You can think of forgetting as like forgetting, like, oh, I forgot. Or you can think of it as forgetting. What is he talking about? And then you could think of forgetting as the opposite of forgiving, right? Because those getting and giving are those
Mm-hmm.
two coins. So when it comes to forgiveness, as we've heard Master say, there's nothing to forgive. And so on a fundamental level, I agree with what you're saying. But I want to paint a picture because I think what you talk about as the experiential wheel, in my mind, just from my own experiences and training, it really evokes a remembrance of many of the teachings I've received around the medicine wheel. And the medicine wheel is similar. And what's so funny is that, you know, so the medicine wheel, so many innumerable teachings. We could spend days talking about it. It could talk about life cycles, seasons. One of the favorite ways that I find is universal is talking about the aspects of being of a human being. So usually there are different models of it and different orientations, and depending on things, it's a very universal tool. But it's similar to this four-spoke wheel that you have invented, and it talks about the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. And we can think of qualities in each of those quadrants too. Like the mental is thinking, right? The physical is doing. And like you so aptly pointed out, in the West, we typically only focus on the thinking and the doing, right?
Yes.
And fix the doing, fix the behavior, and you'll fix the thinking, or fix the thinking, force the affirmation, and you will change your results. And there's this fixation on this. And also that's how we measure achievement, right? It's like if you're doing really well with with what you have and your physicality, then you're good and all this. But the emotional obviously is around feeling, but what's the qualitative state of spiritual? Like if it's thinking, doing, and feeling, what is the spiritual?
Being?
Exactly, right? You got
Oh,
it.
okay.
So when you talk about the beingness as like, this experience. I feel like that's so interesting because um, there's lots of ways of using the medicine wheel, and um, but that experience of anxiety, it's actually like, so the being creates the beingness of something, creates the belief around it, the thought, the repetitive thought, which creates the behavior, which creates the emotional experience of the anxiety. And and you know one of the beautiful ways that relates to community building that I've seen a model of this used is in order to really reclaim our generational health and well-being, and to stop the gap of cycles of abuse, is to first, from that place of that entrance doorway, which usually is the eastern because of the way the sun, we experience the sun traveling in the sky. It's um, create belonging, right? So that helps to shift um, uh, the 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 being that's coming in gets to have the experience of being welcomed. And there's this concept, there's always one more for around the circle, and that's an extension of grace, right? So belonging creates this place of wholesomeness where there isn't those power dynamics, just like you belong. And then once belonging is established in the individual, then they can focus on mastery. But you can't even get to mastery of any skill until you feel like you belong, because you don't have that safety. Back to your pyramid, right? And but and so once you cultivate mastery, then you can move into independence, and even probably more specifically interdependence, because that's, I think, the reality. Interdependence, I don't believe true independence exists. But once you have interdependence, then you can focus on the spiritual and that generational cycle too, of like infancy, adolescence, adulthood into elderhood, which is generosity. And you can give back, and you can complete that cycle of creating belonging. And so, I love that you extended it into a family tree, an experiential family tree, because I feel like that is exactly the kind of work that we do when we engage in our soulful purpose, and we do this deepening work and this refinement of our unique skill sets, and the synthesizing of all the unique gifts that we've accumulated along the way, so that we can give them into the world in a new way that expands all of our capacity, Michael. And so I agree with you that when we are truthful with ourselves, and that we recognize that we do have a full self, that is the ego drive. This is the other thing that I think might be helpful for you and listeners. One of the things I've been contemplating a lot lately, and it's even, I had a little joke for some stand up. Maybe I'll share it here.
I'll be your
It
dry
probably won't
run.
even land, but that's okay. There's a kind of a contemplation in it. Uh, in the letters, he talks about how who we really are, however you want to describe it, the soulful self. Words just don't do it justice, but who we really are is hidden within the self. So
Hmm.
that makes you think like, well, what is the self then? Is the self even real? Because we identify as a self, right? And it's so ubiquitous, like, well, myself, I am my, but we always say myself, but it's kind of never felt right to say my soul. It's like, no, I'm the soul, but I have a self, right? It's
Hmm.
like the self is a vehicle for expression, and we
Right.
need it. It's
It's
necessary.
a container and contents.
It's container and exactly. And I think the self is what allows us to go through the vicissitudes, to experience all the things, so that we can maintain individuation of consciousness to a high point of mastery where we no longer need the self. It sheds like a cocoon, like a skin, and then we can emerge still maintaining individuality of consciousness, but without like losing ourselves in the ocean of all that is. But that's what mastery, I believe, is, and that's what enlightenment is. So yeah, I had this joke. I'll tell this really silly joke.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe one day I'll try it, but it was like it
I'm the
was
king of dad jokes, so
okay.
I'm used to them falling
It
flat
was
all
more
the
like
time.
abstract, kind of like I don't know. Anyways, it was like self, self, and it was like cell, 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 self, cell, and then I get a phone call. I had somebody call self, self, cell phone, cell phone, cell phone, cell. Self one, self one,
Yeah,
self
yeah,
one.
yeah. Yep, I go down my strange paths too.
Who knows where that one came from? Creator's
Yeah,
always
yeah.
telling me these funny jokes that make me laugh, and maybe nobody
Yeah, I
else.
love it. We need it though. We need
Yeah.
it.
Brother, I know it's coming to the top of the hour. I feel like we'd go on and on. You're such a well of inspirational
Thank you.
wisdom and expression. Thank you for being who you are, Michael. Uh, two more questions before you go quickly.
Yeah, yeah. It's
What's the
funny. We
best?
didn't even talk about movement.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Maybe we need part two because I
Yeah.
have a lot to share about movement, and I know you have infinite to share about movement. What is the best way of connecting with you and working with you, Michael? How do people find out more about the daily flow, expanding capacity?
Yeah. So the best way right now is just to come to my school page. I believe it's school.com/expanding capacity. Really simple. We've made it very affordable and accessible for people. This is like the knowledge you think, like I think we should have been taught how to move our bodies in these ways in school.
Hmm.
Like we're in
Hmm.
school for 12 years. You should
Hmm.
come out knowing how to move, like how this body works, right?
It's like
There's
the
certainly
opposite.
plenty of time. Yeah. It's $49 a month. It's $299 for the year.
Okay.
I just try to make it something that's easy to say yes to. And for people who've been struggling for a long time, and the person I think I'm really catering to is somebody who's kind of tried everything. They've
Mm.
been to the physical therapist, the chiropractor, the acupuncture. They've tried all the traditional therapies. It hasn't worked. For some people, it does, and that's fantastic, right? But if you're not getting, but I would also say there's a caveat with working, right? So I learned this when I was a massage therapist. How much of someone feeling better when I put my hands on them is because I created some mechanical shift in the body versus just that human touch and
Mhm.
interaction,
Mhm.
right? And like, wow, my back feels better because I actually feel connected to and valued by another human being.
Mhm.
And so then I thought about, you always hear about the story of like somebody who like turns the wrong way and throws their back out, right? And so it's like, well, let's go to the day before you threw your back out,
Mhm.
right? Would you say that you had a problem? No, you wouldn't, right? But there was clearly a movement limitation within the body before you just went and threw your back out.
Mhm.
And so pain it's obviously a subjective experience. It's almost impossible to measure because there's so many variables. But one thing you can measure is motion. So one thing that I do is teach people how to measure movement. I have this little phrase, if the joint doesn't move, function won't improve. And so we don't need to really focus on what's happening at the muscles or the nerves or other soft tissues. We just really need to understand what's happening at the joint level.
Mhm.
And that then what's cool about that is you can measure movement. And that's why taking people through their whole body and showing them how to measure movement at each complex in the body, it's knowledge is power. In 2 weeks, they have a full daily flow that we then teach in a variety of ways to keep expanding what their body's capable of doing. I
Mhm.
know that was more than what you asked. You asked how people can get in touch with me.
That's okay. You're a
But we didn't
passionate
talk
man.
anything about movement,
Yeah.
and that's probably good enough. The one other thing I would say is that I think it took me 25 years to figure this out, and I only connected these dots, I'm convinced, because I built out the coaching framework. And so, if somebody wants to try to change a behavior, it's my fundamental belief you can't change a behavior. I mean, I guess you could technically change it, but it doesn't mean you're transformed as a person.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, behavior being a way to tell a story about how you've experienced your life. Movement, right, is a way, or stiffness is a way for the body to tell a story, right,
Mhm.
about how it's experiencing chain reactions in the body.
Mhm.
And at that time, this is not a quick trick question. You probably know the answer, but like when something stiffens, right, we want to say, well, what is the body signaling for? And a lot of people, well, and the answer can only be mobility or stability,
Mhm.
right? And so the reality is if something's stiffening, it's trying to create control, stability
Mhm.
at a joint.
Mhm.
But what we've been conditioned to do is go and stretch the thing.
Yeah.
And so we're adding more fuel to the fire. The body
Mhm.
doesn't need more motion.
Mhm.
It needs less motion, but the right motion.
Mhm.
And so one thing that's unique about expanding capacity is teaching people how to stabilize a joint, which is not difficult. You just have to
Yeah.
know how to do it.
Yeah.
How to stabilize a joint. And then in that stable environment, just like safety is the foundation of expression, stability is the foundation of
Yeah.
mobility. And
Yeah.
so you can recover lost ranges of motion by creating stability within the body.
So
And then the
cool.
mobility returns.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah.
Such a depth of knowledge. Do you have time for one last question, or you got
Yeah.
to hop
Yeah.
off?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Okay.
do. I do.
I always love asking our inspiring guests like you, Michael, if you had a magic megaphone, and you could talk to everyone around the world, and you could share something meaningful that everyone could hear, what would you share?
it would 100% be that all you are is goodness. And I probably just like say, like, I have like this stance, you can't become good. Well, it's all you are is goodness. You can't become good because you already are good. You can only wake up to your goodness, humbly receive it as a gift, and powerfully express it as the life you want to live. All we are is goodness. Goodness is all we are. I think I can't think of a better message. Like, as much as I might want people to like know about my school, I feel like that's the bigger message.
Come to my school.
Right,
It's
right.
interesting. If you ever do have an opportunity to do that message in like a crowd of millions, I would say the exact same words, Michael, and I would just slow it down a lot because I feel like
Mm.
people need to soak in those words. Um, the only disappointing thing about this conversation is I thought at some point we'd break into spontaneous song. It didn't happen. Maybe next time.
This was
Uh,
awesome. Thank you.
yeah, I love you, brother. I love what you do, and I
Love you too,
really,
brother.
yeah, I really appreciate having you on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our guests before we wish everyone best wishes and invite my daughter Luciana to say thanks for watching, everyone?
I would maybe just a few quotes.
Sure, you're the quote
Uh,
man.
yeah, I do love me a good quote. I'll start with Thomas Keating, who said, "Transformation is a series of necessary humiliations."
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
It transforms the way you experience setbacks and failures.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, is it needed?
Mm.
Another one is by Buckminster Fuller, who said,
I love it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was just thinking about him on my walk, man. Yeah, there's a whole
Oh,
thing
were
I got to
you?
tell you about that. Yeah, there's like a lot of inspired things that's been happening to me lately. But yeah, okay. Okay. I'm all
Yeah,
ears.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So he said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality.
Mm.
To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
That's exactly what we're doing. That's so interesting. I don't know a
Yeah.
lot about Buckminster Fuller. I'm just starting to learn. And when I tell you exactly what's been coming to me, you're going to laugh. I'm not going to put it on air though. It's
Okay.
pretty special.
Okay.
Michael, so awesome. I still feel like we need to have some kind of a song. So, but I'm not going to do it. So
Okay.
I'll leave
Okay.
the listener. I'll leave it to the listener. I'm gonna invite Luciana to come up to now. Thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in. We'll put in the show notes how to connect with Michael as well. So, Michael, what a blessing and light you are in the world. Thanks, man, for being who you are. Blessings to you and your family and all those who you help expand their capacity, brother.
Thank you, Nathaniel. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for watching. You say ciao ciao.
Bye.
I love you so much.